You're listening to Big World Network.
Accidental Passion, Episode 6. Favor Returned, Part 1. Kim. Read by Meagan Hedin. Warning. Although there is no material subject matter within that couldn't be found in any general bookstore with no age constraint, this series is rated 18 and contains adult situations and content. It is intended for mature audiences only and should not be read if you are uncomfortable with graphic sexual intimacy. Kim couldn't take it anymore. She had to see Ryan, and although she was feeling a little bit like a stalker, she laid those feelings aside, knowing he had sent a private investigator looking for her. So searching online and finding a book signing at one of the nicest hotels in downtown Detroit and attending it didn't seem too far off base for her. She was tired of waiting and hoping that he would contact her. At least it would give her a chance to properly thank him for the protection he had provided her with. So after parking in the hotel parking garage, she climbed out of her SUV and ran a hand down her short skirt to eliminate any wrinkles. She had spent an extraordinary amount of time deciding what to wear and standing in front of the mirror evaluating her appearance. She had wanted something sexy, but not slutty, and something that was professional enough for the book signing and the 3-author panel discussion Ryan was scheduled to participate in. She was pleased with the result and hoped he would be too. The signing was set up in a large conference room with curtains on either side of the front end of the room that were pulled open and presumably used to divide the room in half for smaller groups. There were 3 news anchor-type desks with the publisher's logo on the front of each one, and they were positioned apart from each other, with one on either end of the curtains and one in the center. Although there were lines to each of them, it didn't take Kim long to spot Ryan's gorgeous red hair at one of the desks on the end next to the large hanging curtains. Kim worked her way through the chairs set up for the panel discussion to follow and got in line. While waiting, she watched Ryan closely as he greeted each person with a warm smile. My God, he is so handsome and sexy, Kim thought. His smile was so perfect, disarming and friendly, and his blue eyes, accentuated by the red hair, shined like a beacon. It was making Kim very excited and turned on again, just thinking about the flight and his touching her under the blue blanket. She couldn't believe how much she desired him. When she reached the desk and was next in line, Ryan turned to her, smiling and asking, "Who should I make this out?" and then stopped mid-sentence the moment he recognized her. Before he could say anything more, the lights in the conference room began to flash on and off, and someone spoke into a microphone with their breath being heard loudly over the speakers. "Please take your seats. Please take your seats. We will begin the panel discussion now." Kim smiled at him and moved off to the side of the room. It was her intention to take a seat in the front, but instead, she moved to the wall and then slid in behind the curtain. She wanted to get a chance to examine him and watch from the side. He glanced over to her and smiled. As the other 2 authors made their way to the other desks, a man with a wireless microphone stood back with the seated crowd and moderated the discussion after making introductions. When Ryan would answer questions from the moderator or the audience, Kim couldn't help but admire how well he handled himself. He seemed so relaxed and confident, yet there wasn't the slightest bit of arrogance in him. She was so turned on by him, so attracted to him, both physically and now intellectually. Looking down, she noticed that the curtain was butted up against the side of his desk, which wasn't much of a desk at all. Although it looked impressive on the front, it was a simple structure made out of 2x4s and didn't even have sides to it, which was probably why it was angled to the crowd and butted up against the curtains. She could see his legs underneath. It was cute to her how he would hop his knee up and down on his foot when he was answering a question, that being his only sign of any nervousness. Although Kim realized none of the audience could see him under the desk. And then it hit her. Never in her life, never in any life could she imagine doing what had just popped into her mind. Maybe it was her mood and desire. Maybe it was the realization that his public pleasuring of her hadn't been repaid, but Kim knew what she was going to do. She kneeled down behind the curtain on the carpet, got down on her hands and knees, and crawled quietly under the large desk. She was vaguely aware of a glance from the corner of Ryan's eyes before she disappeared under it. Only a simple plywood facade separated her from the crowd, and she felt her heart racing as another question was directed at Ryan. This was crazy. "What am I doing?" she asked herself, as she carefully positioned herself in front of him. You live only once, and this is so crazy he will either never talk to me again or love me for the rest of my life. Now positioned sitting on the floor under the pseudo-news desk with her legs folded under her, she gently placed a hand on the inside of each knee over the blue dockers he was wearing. His legs jumped ever so slightly, but that was it. It had begun, and she knew he would have no way of stopping her without creating a scene or anyone noticing. Because the desk was curved around Ryan, Kim remained perfectly shielded, and anyone seeing him would have no idea someone was under the desk. So she continued by gently pushing his legs apart, and then sliding her hands up the inside of his legs, one on each side. Without hesitation, she brought both hands together to meet between his legs and rubbed him lightly through the fabric. The sensation of feeling him grow hard under her hands was incredible. It was she who was causing this reaction and excitement in him. As the form of his cock grew more defined under her touch, she could feel it straining against the fabric, begging to be released. He was fully grown now to the point where she could take one hand and slide it up and down the exposed half of his shaft under the fabric. Her mind was racing. What is he thinking now? What is he feeling now? Kim waited until Ryan was asked another question, and was in the process of answering, just to increase the challenge she was giving him to remain in control, the same way he had done in the airplane. Choosing that moment to unbuckle his belt and his slacks, she ran her hand down over his cock again with the zipper in tow. She could feel his legs tighten up, trying to restrain any reaction. As he spoke to the crowd on the other side of the thin plywood facade of the desk, Kim wondered what his facial expression was. Was he turning as red as his hair, making it even more noticeable? It turned her on that no one, of all the people in the crowd, had any idea what was happening to this man before their very eyes. After he finished answering his question, Kim pulled his slacks open, exposing low-cut briefs that were blue with white trim. She found it even more of a turn-on that he wore sexy underwear, and while she ran her hand over it, feeling the fabric tight around his bulge, she inadvertently kicked the front wall of the desk as she repositioned herself. It was loud, and worse, it made his microphone pop slightly. She froze, as did Ryan, not that he was moving anyway. She wasn't sure what she expected, but moments ticked by and nothing happened. Kim resumed her fun. She traced the outline of his fully erect cock over his briefs, up one side, over his head, and back down the other, where she paused to gently rub his package below. The sensation was obviously a good one for Ryan, and although he was unable to move at all, she felt his cock jump several times from her touch. She was so turned on and desperately wanted to touch herself, but instead focused solely on him. His cock had grown so hard that the tip was almost peeking out the top of his low-cut briefs, and a little wet circle was forming from a release of pre-cum. Kim circled the very tip of his cock with her index finger, tracing over the small wet circle. This time when his cock jumped, she also felt his legs tighten together from the pleasure, to the point where they were pressing against her, positioned between them. Slowly, as Ryan was answering another question, Kim pulled the waistband of his briefs down enough to expose his head. "Oh my God, he is perfect," she thought, as she admired his pink head. She traced around the base of his large head with her finger, pausing at the center underside, his most sensitive spot. She then circled her finger over the top of him, spreading the silky pre-cum around. She knew the pleasure must be so intense for him. Kim then leaned in and gently, taking her time, put her lips to him and kissed. She felt him jump. One of his hands moved down, and from the audience perspective, it could have been for any reason, including scratching his leg, if they even bothered to notice. He brought his hand to her head between his legs and ran his fingers lovingly through her hair, before returning to the top of the desk. Encouraged, Kim took him in her warm mouth, her tongue swirling around him. She pulled his briefs down as far as she could and slid down him until she could go no further, and then came back up slowly. He tasted amazing, the taste of his flesh, the subtle smell. It was all overpowering for her. She never enjoyed allowing a man to finish in her mouth, or the taste, but now she wanted very much to feel his release, the hot spurts of sex all caused by her. She wanted to experience and share his pleasure with him in the most intimate way. She needed to taste him. Kim continued working her mouth and tongue on him. He had become quite wet, and she grew more accustomed to his size, each time allowing him deeper into her mouth. She knew by the tightening of his legs around her and the slight change in his size, feeling him become momentarily even more engorged and hard, that he was about to release. She felt the first hot sensation in her mouth, followed by an additional spasm after spasm, seemingly filling her. She tried to keep up, so incredibly turned on by the raw nature of the man, taking his most intimate part of him in her. When he had finished, she continued to move her mouth on him, aware that the overstimulation was virtually making it impossible for him to hold still. Finally she slowed, but allowed him to remain in her mouth until he grew soft. Making sure he was clean and there was no evidence of their activity, she kissed his soft member one more time and carefully tucked him back in his briefs under the waistband. She then zipped him up, did his button, and carefully buckled him up as well, just as she was aware of the crowd clapping. Crawling back out behind the curtain, Kim exited a side door unnoticed by anyone, and left without looking back at Ryan.
This has been a presentation of Big World Network. Visit us on BigWorldNetwork.com for more free weekly series, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to Big World Network.